Hello, everybody from the Woods and Forest community. Thanks for joining us for season one of the podcast. This has been a really enjoyable experience having the opportunity to continuously see some of my best friends online and having the chance to learn about some of the most intriguing animals and creating different games and all kinds of the other stuff that we did. You look back at all of season one, we had a pretty interesting and intense adventure, whether it be Sean or Amphibicast or Hudson Valley Reptile and Rescue. Like, we had a lot of really interesting people come on, and even in the beginning, just kind of starting this up with playing the games, like the state tree game, state invert game, stuff like that. I thought that was pretty neat. But today we're here to talk about a special project and kind of wrap up the calendar year for the Woods and Forest Media YouTube channel, and that has to do with Frog Week. So we're going to get into talking about Frog Week and hearing what Drew and Amelia have to say, and I'm really looking forward to having this conversation. So you guys had the chance to see 4 of the 8 episodes of Frog Week this year. I'm just curious to hear, especially, I don't know, you guys both had the chance to see it last year too. Amelia, you were in it, and Drew, you were a guest on Facebook Live. So, I mean, what's your thoughts on how things have really progressed from year 4 to this is year 5 that people are going to see?
Well, I'll start off by saying, not spoiling anything, but I'm in it this year, so that's a big improvement.
I'll say.
That's about me. But no, I mean, yeah, I mean that's been your common theme. Is this really the 5th year already?
Isn't it crazy? Yeah.
That's pretty impressive. Half a decade. So I mean, yeah, I mean, a common theme has just been improvement every year. Obviously, you've whether it be your relationship with the populations that you're working with, as you have seen the trends that they have every year, year in and year out, or whether it be the progressions that you've made as a videographer. It's certainly always been a game of just seeing progress from year to year. It's not ever been static. So, very broadly speaking, it's certainly been cool to see that every year is better than the last. So that's how I would start it off, is just saying that it was cool to see just the different shots you're getting, the stories that you're telling, and just kind of how that's evolving continuously year over year.
Yeah, I would have to agree with most of what Drew just said. All of the drone content and stuff in the episodes that we got to see was really fascinating, especially like the contrasts with the before and after some of the vernal pools and stuff were drying up. Really kind of puts into perspective that kind of thing a lot better than just showing it on the ground, kind of.
I completely agree. I mean, yeah, we're touching now on the drone, and I think this, well, it was like maybe early summer last year before the podcast started. I was telling people, yeah, I'm trying to get a drone license. I'm trying to get the education permit for the herps for my pets. I'm gonna get a weather station. Everybody's kind of like, yeah, okay, like where is this leading? Like, how does this apply to conservation? How does this apply with anything to what you've already been doing? And so I don't know. Do you feel even like the 4K trail camera with the catching the audio or catching the animals? I mean, all the little gadgets, all the different tools that I used. It's almost like I feel like Batman with his belt, because I just was trying to show as much as I could. Did you guys find that to be effective, or even something that maybe you'll take back with you for maybe projects you guys will do in the future?
I think so, for sure. I mean, something I have learned as I get more experienced in wildlife media, or just media in general, is you don't necessarily make giant jumps in your production. There's kind of all these little skills and these little stylistic choices that you kind of learn, and you build upon them very slowly. So even though some of those are big hardware steps for you, whether it be getting your Part 107 license and getting your first drone, or getting a weather station, or all these big pieces, each of those kind of represents incremental increases in the information that you're bringing in, the shots that you're including, and just the overall general quality of your storytelling. So yeah, I think they've all been very valuable for sure, in just kind of always being improving, never being content and settling with the quality that you're producing, and always looking to improve on what you did before.
Yeah, the shots with the toads showing up at the pond and stuff were really neat. Um, The weather station, I'm really curious to see what all you can do with that. If there'd be a way to like maybe kind of juxtapose the whatever readings it's giving you for like your current weather conditions and stuff on your shots or something like that to really kind of get all that information in there.
Yeah, I completely agree. One of the things I want to be careful with is I don't want to give people, I said this repeatedly in like the first 3 episodes about poachers, because there's
Right.
definitely people around me that it's kind of Disney-esque where like I'm going with a bucket, saving the animals, taking them out of the bucket, right, and letting them go. And then somebody's coming behind me with a van and they've got 5-gallon buckets and like, get in the bucket and I'm going to sell you or feed you to my snakes. So yeah, I want to try to be careful. And I've had some hard situations where I was pressed by newspaper reporters at times, like, hey, you've got to tell me like where this location is. And it's like we'd go back and forth for like a half hour. I'm like, I don't know, like I don't know if I can. And they're like, you got to tell me or we can't write the story. And I caved at some point, but I wasn't the happiest. But yeah, I mean, so with the weather station, I'm hoping for it to have a really big impact in the last 2 episodes because I get a chance to show maybe what the yearly rainfall was. I get a chance to show some different variables. I don't think I have it posted publicly for people to see what the care is for my animals inside because like I use that weather station. The whole goal was to try to blend what's happening outside with what can happen inside and try to replicate that. So that's why like understanding the rainfall, the wind gust, the humidity, the dew point, and I can get all that indoors as well because it's also made for indoor sensors. And I finally got the big tank and I got the background on it. It looks much nicer in person than it does in pictures right now. But I like what we're experiencing in Pennsylvania right now. The lows are in like the high 60s, which I don't know if that's normal, but I know I can replicate that in the tank. So it's kind of been crazy for me to see I can replicate the end of June going through July up to like now, like live. And I don't know how long this will go, but the fact that I can, replicate literal weather conditions and temperatures, highs and lows, and all of that is like really exciting to me. But I want to show people also my experience with going out and why the weather station matters because and I could have done this more in the spring. It was just kind of a new toy at that point, so next year I think we'll really get to break it open and see all its features. But I could see where microclimates are. So in one county that's 10 minutes away, it could potentially be 5 or 10 degrees warmer than where I am right now. And Drew kind of had that experience. For episode 1, we went up to the top of this mountain. It was like, I think it was warm, and we went out to this bog, and it was very, very cold. And the elevation difference compared to my house, where there were frogs calling, like one place didn't have frogs, one place we just missed them, and like my house still had them. So I mean, yeah, the weather station can help us to potentially find frogs in a different way.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a very valuable tool. And something that really struck home for me when we did our shooting together was just how lightning quick some of these significant breeding events can be. I mean, I was there in the early spring, so right around breeding season, and I don't want it to be lost on people that when we were working with these wood frogs, the entirety of their breeding at a couple of sites literally took place within a 24-hour period. I mean,
Yeah.
our first night or two was like very little activity, and then literally one night, just a explosion of activity, just hundreds of frogs at multiple sites. And then the next night, egg masses everywhere and barely any frogs. So I think the locality of that weather station and your ability to kind of coincide what you're seeing in the field with some of the corresponding variables of temperature and precipitation and things like that, you can really kind of supplement that story of how important it is to emphasize that this happens just so quickly, and these populations need to be able to have the ability to react lightning quick and have those explosive breeding periods. Because yeah, like I said, it was literally a 24-hour period that these populations of frogs did their entire breeding, and it was something I honestly wouldn't have believed if I wasn't there to experience it over our time together. It
Oh
was
yeah, there
really
have been so many times that I've been intending to go out and look for wood frogs and realize I just missed them by the time I finally get out there. They're season is so quick, that particular species especially.
Yeah. I mean, we got out there on, I think it was a Wednesday,
Yeah.
and it was low activity. We found a couple, and then Thursday we were just they were piled up, and we were so distracted at one site that we didn't even end up hitting the other. And then we went to the other the night after. There were no frogs to be seen, but I mean, it had to be 300 egg masses at least, just in this one small pool, just so densely packed. We can only imagine the activity there. So yeah, I think the weather station really can help you tell a story of just how rapid that takes place and the environmental cues that are at hand.
Yeah, I was really disappointed because last year I was there for that explosion at the top of the mountain, and I thought that was amazing. It was I've never actually had a deafening wood frog course before, but that is the place if you want to go. They were drowning out the spring peepers, and I mean, you didn't get to see that time. I mean, that might even be worth coming back to do an investigation just to see that. I mean, literally, you're over 2,000 feet up, and you're on a mountain, and there's like at least 800 wood frogs, if not more, that are in this, you know, two, maybe just one vernal pool. It was just truly unbelievable. But yeah, maybe I'll go back and show people for episode 8 that explosion from last year to really give them the full perspective. But the big thing that I want to do for the second half of Frog Week, especially 7 and 8, like episodes 7 and 8, I want people to see the conclusion and kind of see like how did these different breeding grounds do? Like how did the toads do? How did the wood frogs do? How did the gray tree frogs do? Um, what progress did we make with the pickerel frog? There's a lot of different things that I think need, like, I guess this is the other part of the maturity of the storytelling, is like trying to find a way to land the plane that is uh, fulfilling. So that way there's no cliffhangers, especially because this is like a yearly basis. So if there's a cliffhanger, it's an entire year of a cliffhanger to explain. And this isn't, you know, Marvel Studios or some type of movie theater where we're trying to like keep people hanging on to see what happens to the Avengers in the next one, because I think every year has its own unique stories. So
The first ever frog post credits scene.
yeah, exactly. How did you guys feel about this was in the very first Frog Week, but it was deemed controversial, and it finally made its way back to Frog Week year 5 with the pets. What was your like thoughts of seeing like Ace or the Great Tree Frogs, or hearing about like the story of the background, like what the logo means, like just all these different things? I mean, they're going to make more appearances later on, but I mean, the videos you've seen were more oriented towards the frogs and toads like that I have.
I was just thinking, weren't you planning on doing some more content with your critters at home in the next few episodes?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, yeah, I thought that they tied in just fine. It'll be interesting to see more of what you can kind of elaborate on without necessarily giving your locations away too much, on how you translate what you're observing out in the wild to how you're setting up and maintaining your habitats at home and stuff like that, in terms of your, you know, the environment and also your feeders and whatnot. You've talked about trying to raise some more native feeders and stuff for a more authentic diet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say once again, I know we've talked about this before, but just all of your pets at home, especially now that I've gotten to meet them, they all play into the overall message really well of having this connection to conserving the wildlife that you share your backyard and beyond with. I mean, you know, being able to have that interplay of having that population scale appreciation where you're going out and you're observing and surveying these large populations of frogs or salamanders or what have you, and then being able to kind of compare that to the individuals that you have at home with their own personalities and their own unique needs and the way that you're integrating their lifestyles with how they would in the wild. It continues to be a very powerful message and kind of represent how these animals are individuals and how they should be cared for as such, but that you can also kind of upscale that to wanting to protect entire native populations.
Yeah, now I didn't tell you guys that the Great Tree Frog episode is like the like main or the feature episode for this year. But what was your, I guess, your perspective on like the, just specifically speaking, the Eastern Great Tree Frog episode?
That was my favorite episode, I think. It was neat getting to kind of follow along the process with you of how you were actually going out and looking for the frogs throughout the night and stuff like that, that it was just kind of almost getting to kind of experience that with you. And the way that you were using the frog calls and actually getting the response was really fun to see. Kind of reminds me of a trip I went on I think it was my freshman year of college for a biology class. We did a weekend getaway, and one of the activities that we did, we went out at night and lured in some barred owls by playing their calls like that, and it was really awesome to see.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I do want to. Well, I'll first finish this, but I want to explain something that happened when Drew was here. So, yeah, the Great Tree Frog episode I felt was so important to me because it's, I really thought that was my opportunity to show people like this is somebody who literally cares about these animals like to the extreme that he even keeps them, and he was also able to go out and like find populations that never were, like they never were there or nobody ever knew they were there. And like now, I mean, I didn't really showcase what I'm doing with the neighbors in this year's episode, but trying to help, even if it's conservation of species that are labeled abundant, even though they're not abundant in these two counties. Um, I had this conversation with somebody from the Fish and Boat Commission today, actually, but I'd rather want to create a nonprofit and have the conservation tools in place and not be needed than to not have them and be needed. So if something were to happen, we could potentially head start some frogs and toads that are common right now, but in 50 years, who's to say, they don't disappear, just like our northern leopard frogs in the state. So, yeah, I thought, especially showing you guys the deforestation of where these animals are, and because they're just in such a small, like a microclimate almost, because they're just gathered around certain spots, and if the trees come down, I mean, who knows what'll happen? Who knows how they'll do being tree frogs? Yeah, I think this year Frog Week was, I think I told you guys this, but I really tried to hit it more in the trailer and stuff like that about how personal this was to me, because I had had so many issues early in the year before even episode 1 started with a water quality crisis that I had no idea about. So I was continuously using my reverse osmosis system, and I didn't realize that the water was making the frogs swollen and it was causing bloat, and they actually, some of them became septic. And the longer I looked back and kind of traced this back, I saw that I'd lost a lot of my animals, like everybody that I'd lost over the last year because of this one problem. So to me, that was one of the real devastating points, and I talked about that a little bit in the Great Tree Frog episode, of all the animals behind me. And Drew, you actually got the chance to see, this is kind of sad, but like the last week of their lives for Meredith and Dante before they actually died. And that was a real hard pill to swallow, especially for Meredith, going from one of the healthiest, robust, like more muscular great tree frogs to like, just in misery and pain and suffering, and just dies.
Did you figure out exactly what the issue was? Was it a contamination thing?
Yeah. So
Okay.
the problem was what I was doing to neutralize the water, it wasn't working.
Hmm.
And the water was very soft and acidic, because a reverse osmosis system, a lot of people don't catch this, but it actually puts out water lower than a 6. And like continuous exposure to that for certain frogs and toads, if they're not green frogs, they can't handle it. Green frogs are the only frogs that can handle it. So what was
Hmm.
happening was certain frogs and toads were just to the point where it was killing them. And like I started to get on this actually when Ace stopped going in the water dish, because she's always in the water. So I'm like, well, if she's protesting, there's a problem, because she doesn't protest her water. And so she actually helped me to find it. And then Meredith and Dante, sadly, because of what happened to them, it helped me to find it. So they kind of, in their dying efforts, that was how we discovered the problem. So I got a new reverse osmosis system, and I'm doing more now. I'm using a chemical to balance the pH, and I put in ReptiSafe and pond salt. So I'm doing all this stuff like the zoos are doing for the water quality. But I mean, that was a lot. It was a lot of stuff to carry. And then I think it was during the like I think it was a couple of days before Drew came to the house. Like I had COVID many months before that in August, but I just felt like I don't know. I just got like this weird sadness. It was before Meredith and Dante died, and I just felt like I don't know if they call it long COVID or what, but like something was like definitely wrong. I was not in the normal state of mind. I just could kind of feel it, like I was kind of down. So I kind of felt really bad because I had no idea like why or where it came from. And it's like I went from feeling down to then that happening. And it's like I really went through a lot of like chaos in the beginning of Frog Week. And then like the season was just so cold for so long. So it kind of caused some problems as well. So yeah, it's like, it's a really, I mean, not even necessarily because I was doing it on purpose, but like it really became an emotional story because it's like there's so much that happened to me, so much that I was able to articulate and show. And I'm sorry for going on this rant. I just wanted to kind of explain like there's some crazy stuff that was happening behind the scenes while this was happening that that I wanted to kind of talk about because like I don't think that people will see it in the videos because I was removed and I was narrating it after the fact, but I just kind of wanted to explain like where I was at, like how I was feeling. I mean, losing my frogs and then having to go out and look for more, like maybe a couple weeks apart, was a really hard turnaround. So just all of that stuff, like we're talking about with the pets and with like the conservation. So yeah, it really, it really made me have to decide: are you gonna screw around, or are you gonna go all in? And I really think that from these episodes you guys saw and the rest of Frog Week, I tried to go all in.
So where are you keeping your male gray tree frog now? I'm drawing a blank on his name. That
Esperanza.
yeah, that one. That you picked up earlier, that he's not going to be just absolutely driving you nuts with that call. Because I had a male in my house for a couple of weeks, a couple of years ago that got injured, and so I had him around for a while I was fixing up his wounds and nursing him back to health. And as he started to get better and get more energy, he would be calling and calling, and he was so loud. I was still over at my parents' house at the time, and we'd be able to hear him across the house, in the basement, through the floor and stuff. And I was like, I don't think I would necessarily want to keep a male of these as a pet. That's a lot of noise to deal with.
Oh my, episode 7. Okay, I gotta tell you a spoiler. So I go to Somerset County and I'm trying to find the gray tree frog again, and it's been so hard for me over these last 3 years because like they're just very hard. They're even harder to find because I found a population in Cambria and I know exactly where they're gathering now. I found that this year, but I never really had that core population in Somerset, and it was like 4 weeks ago. So I was 0 for 3. So 4 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, Esperanza just starts calling in the evening, and I'm like, oh. He's calling. So I'm like, well, maybe I'll go and I'll see if I could find them in the one spot that was more likely than the others. So I go down to Somerset, and all of a sudden they're calling and they're out. So he gave away their position and he's over an hour away. So I go back home, and he's quiet. And then a couple of days later, he just starts calling again. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm just going to go down again because maybe he's onto something. He gave away their position again. So by
That's
him,
really cool.
yeah, well, not for them because the frog that lived 2 hours away was giving away their location. And he helped me to actually, there's 3 things I learned from Esperanza for Frog Week. The first one is the call that I played that night, like I needed to be shorter with it because of the trills that it's too nerdy, but I learned how to do it the right way. Okay. The second thing was Esperanza helped me to find the actual population. And the third thing is I think Esperanza helped me to catch on to possibly a stimulating thing we can do in captivity, and that's by doing callback. Because if he's competing, if he feels like he's competing and he's winning against another great tree frog, it might kind of puff his ego up, sort of. But I think they like that. I think they enjoy the callback. So to me, I was actually in here playing games with him for like an hour or two, like literally going back and forth, and he would call, and it's like I think that he enjoyed it, to be honest with you. So it makes me wonder if we cycle our animals, or even if they're exotic, depending on who's watching this. If you're doing callback and your animals are responding, is that another way of like stimulation for keeping frogs and toads in captivity? I never would have thought that until this little frog.
I definitely would agree that that's a good form of enrichment for them. Which app was it that you were using for those calls?
So it's no longer like I can't get it from my new iPhone, but the Envirothon app. So there's a organization in Pennsylvania that trains high school students, and they compete for like what high school is the most knowledgeable about sciences, like earth sciences and environmental sciences. So they made an app a couple years ago with bird calls, frog calls, and like all this other stuff. And I thought, that's perfect because I don't got to go to YouTube or pirate a audio call or whatever. Like I could just use the app and we'll figure it out if it works or not. And it has. It always has worked. So yeah, I just, again, I can't believe that a lot of these breakthroughs though came after I had Esperanza, and he's come into a very good situation. Like in terms of my keeping, it's like at a whole different level, and he's got a lot more eyes on him. Like I make sure I maintain his diet.
I think there's kind of 2 points I would say that I really derived from everything you talked about in regard to your gray tree frogs and just that whole episode and that whole subject in general. The first I would say is it's really, you create the narrative with whatever media you make. If it was up to you with your storytelling, you could convince your viewers that there are great tree frogs in every county in Pennsylvania in the millions, or you could convince them that they are struggling heavily and that they are heavily endangered. You have the the inherent responsibility of being genuine and showing things as they are, and you do that. But the point that I'm trying to get to this is being able to show off the struggles that you've had with your animals. I know it's very hard to do, to put yourself through actually producing that after suffering through it yourself. And I think it's very important and very powerful because conservation is this weird balance of trying not to be too negative, where everything's just doom and gloom and all of our native animals and all of these exotic species are all screwed because of humans. And then at the same time, you don't want to be so optimistic where it's like, oh, everything's fine, we don't have to worry about it. There's, the truth and the best path lies somewhere in the middle. So I think it's very powerful for you to be able to show all the work you've done with some of these flourishing populations in some counties, but then also show the places where there are no records of gray tree frogs, for example, or back at home to show your animals enjoying themselves, having personality and feeding, but at the same time encountering these situations where things go wrong and it becomes a tragedy because of it. So even though it's really a shame that that happened, and personally, I feel for you a lot, and I'm sorry to go through that, but it's very respectable that you were able to turn that into a positive message in some way, in the form of showing that this is the reality that pet owners deal with. It's the reality of conservation, that there is an interplay between the good and the bad here, and that's what you're haggling with on the scale of Western Pennsylvania, and that's what conservationists are dealing with wherever it is that they are working. So I thought that was very powerful, and I also think it's important that you emphasize kind of where gray tree frogs are having strongholds and where they're not being found, because I think we're kind of leading into a really strong point that they're an animal that people just call abundant, right? Because where there are a lot of places where they're found in very hard numbers or very high numbers. And something that is, I don't know if I'd say it's a pet peeve of mine, but it's really interesting if you look at range maps of some more widely distributed species, especially in the US, you will see these big, solid kind of patches of coloration on the map. For example, my study species, the mole salamander, you'll see its native range is just this giant band across the entire southeastern coastal plain that stretches from like Virginia all the way down across the panhandle of Florida all the way to Texas. And yeah, that entire area, there are places where these salamanders exist there, but it kind of inherently, just looking at it, we're very visual and we interpret visually. It kind of tells you automatically, oh, everywhere in this range there are salamanders, and that's just not true, right? There's places like you said where there are very abundant populations, and there are entire counties where they have not been seen. But we've kind of used rough estimates to paint these really broad stroke pictures of species distributions to suggest that that's where they are. And I think that can be kind of dangerous when you make that assumption, because it gets into the idea of, in my mind, extinction versus extirpation. So extinction is like the really big, scary word that everyone's trying to avoid with conservation, and for good reason. Obviously, that is what we consider the zero-sum game, the point of no return, where an animal goes extinct and you just cannot bring it back because there's none of it. And I know there's emerging technology with certain science where they're looking at cloning and they're looking at raising animals from like test tube animals and whatnot through a lot of really cool science, but won't get into that for now. But yeah, obviously extinction is seen as the real end all be all. We have to avoid this. This is top conservation priority, is avoid extinction. But I think that really, in the case of species that we call abundant, really sweeps extirpation under the rug. And for those of you who don't know, this extirpation is just essentially a local extinction. It's the disappearance of one population from one area of an animal. So getting back to Aaron's point, I think it's important to recognize that we can't just wait for extinction to be the concern, because extirpation is a very real concern too, where even if you have an abundance of these gray tree frogs in Pennsylvania, for example, it can be really harmful for them to disappear from one population segment. Even if they are found in a lot of other places, you can have them disappear from just one spot, and that can have trickle-down effects that can affect an entire ecosystem potentially. So I think what you're doing really speaks to that well, just the idea that taking priority of populations at that scale is important. And this is something you and I have talked about, how you can't just wait for something to be an extinction concern, because extirpation is a very, very real threat to one that could potentially lead to extinction, and it's one that we have to address when we're talking about conservation.
I guess one of the last things I'll talk about here is how we've evolved it. It's a media brand working with a nonprofit now, so people get the chance to see, like you see to my left and my right, okay, so this is the nonprofit, this is the media brand. But anyway, having the opportunity to kind of showcase how they work together and creating that, and I'm trying to end Frog Week, and we're talking about bringing people along. I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say about this as more of a quick wrap up. But in the same vein of Frog Week being a starting point, it's going to mean, like, I want to transition the podcast, I want to transition the pet show and the hiking show into, like, I want to invite people to come from Frog Week to watch this stuff, because I don't think that that's happened. I don't think that the quality was always there or the projects were always there, but I think now we can bridge the gap. So I'm curious to see what you guys think with, like, you already know Woods and Forest Media is a melting pot of conservation, pet care, and hiking. And now we're trying to see if we can kind of bring the audience together to watch as much of it as they can. Thinking of it like it's a streaming platform in a way, and you two specifically have an opportunity to be a part of that. I mean, like, where do you hope that Woods and Forest Media goes, projections after this?
Yeah, I mean, it's always an interesting balance of bringing in different audiences. And you certainly, I mean, there's going to be people who just come for their one niche of interest, and you're never going to translate them over to anything else. There's people who just want to watch stuff about pet care, so that's what they're going to watch, or they just want to see more adventure stuff, so they're going to kind of go that route. But I'd say, yeah, that's the goal, is kind of what I'd like to see is keep the idea or the ideal of the melting pot strong, where you can kind of try to bridge those gaps, because it's a very important thing. So I'd say, yeah, just continuing to stay diverse in that regard, but also kind of have that interconnection between everything that you're doing. Just keeping that in mind would be probably the greatest thing to see, because then you can bridge those gaps and you can start teaching people who are interested in pet care about conservation, or people that are interested in conservation about pet care. You can kind of create a more holistic knowledge base for all these people. You can connect to their knowledge. You can connect to the people themselves through those different communities, which is always a special thing. And everyone benefits in those scenarios, because if I'm someone who's just interested in pet care and I start getting motivated about conservation through the people I meet, then I'm going to be likely to start contributing to it in some way. So I would say, that in my ideal world, as you continue to grow it, you keep emphasizing that interconnectedness, and it'll serve you well too, because obviously if people are engaging with more of what you're doing, it'll help the brand for sure. But it'll also just help you achieve all of the goals you want to, if people are continuing to come for one thing but stay for all the others.
Excited to see how you put all your elements together going forward in future productions and stuff, as you get more opportunities to practice how to integrate everything, now that you've got a lot of new shiny new toys to work with this season.
I think this is the first year that I have the intentions of trying to bring the audience with me to go through the year, rather than just like, oh, we'll see you again next year for Frog Week. So that's my goal for the last 2 episodes, is to be inclusive. We actually had a changing of the guard. So the hiking show for seasons 1 and 2 was the top show, not counting Frog Week because it's a whole different thing. But this year, Wild Vivarium's The Pet Show, which was almost canceled, is now, it actually is breaking even with Frog Week 2022 just this season. So, and the shorts,
you can't cancel that before you get your 240 gallon all set up.
Yeah. Well,
we want to see how that turns out.
Yeah, the surprising thing was the shorts did so well. I mean, like, I don't want to say averages, but a lot of it, especially in the beginning, like this time last year, 5,000, 9,000, 11,000 views for some of the shorts. And I mean, they don't touch the one Frog Week short is almost to 30,000 views, which is crazy from last year. But what that shows me is, even if it's a show that's on the brink of being canceled, we can change it. We can steer the ship, and now it overtook the hiking show. Who's to say next year, speaking about the fall, this podcast could potentially become number one. Like, I want to have a friendly competition. I want to make everybody I want everybody to think like what they're doing is the best, but not enough like that they hate the other shows. You know what I mean? Like, I want it to be like friendly, but still like people want to see it succeed. And like, it's just really crazy to see, the hiking show dominating, and now it's like, well, now it's not. Now it's almost like a counterpunch. So it's been cool to see the change, and even the audience. One is a slow burn, one gets a lot of views on day one. And I don't know, it's been really unique to see. But last couple minutes here, I'll just say, like, the last thing that you'll see will hopefully be the 240 gallon. That's its own show, its own project. It won't actually be in Wild Vivariums, but I'm very pleased to say that it will happen in 2024. It'll have its own episodes, and I have a handful of sponsors, and I'm really excited for Ace and for the upcoming toad that you guys will meet that I got from Cal U. She's a Cal U toad. Rescued her from another college. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much all I have. I hope that you guys will continue to follow Frog Week, and you guys will watch it, and hopefully check out some of the other shows as well, because you could see Drew and Amelia on the podcast. You could see Drew, I guess, in Frog Week 2023, and Amelia in Frog Week 2022. And hopefully we'll have more opportunities to get them on screen. But yeah, thank you guys for joining us, and I'm really thankful that you guys wanted to watch Frog Week and support it to help it to get to 5 years. But thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you guys as well, Amelia and Drew. Can't wait for season 2 to dive into more awesome discussion.
Happy to be a part of it.
Yep, happy to be here.